member of the Information Society? That's a difficult question because I didn't know we were in the Information Society.
Back out here today, working more on the market plot, and I'm going to be redoing these 3 beds here. I still seed bedded this. Still seed bedding is when you just lay out a poly tarp over the ground, and that creates a lot of heat under the ground, causes weed seeds to germinate, and then they die underneath the tarp because they can't get light. So that's how I prepared this area. Yesterday I raked away all the dead stuff and leaves, and I'm trying to get more rocks. These are my worst 3 beds for my rocks. So I'm going to rake this again. Trying to get more rocks out of here. Then I'm gonna broadfork, lift up a few more rocks, I'll get the rocks out, and then we'll plant and just go for it. Well, I've got 2 implements here. This is a Johnny Seed broadfork, and this is just their most basic broadfork, and it works really well for beds that are more established or that are softer, less clayey and rocky. So for beds that are more hard packed or have a lot of rocks, I recommend using a pitchfork, and using a pitchfork that has really strong tines on it so that rocks and stuff don't bend it. This is also good for doing some minimal disturbance in areas that are harder to get to, harder to reach. So now check out the difference here. So this, I can just use my foot, and I'm getting the same penetration. I know some people even prefer to use something like this or even a little bit wider pitchfork. So the broadfork's great for beds that are already established. They're soft, they're nice, they're easy to work with. There's not rocks. That's perfect. But for those more difficult beds, those newly established beds, then I'd recommend either a really strong, wide pitchfork, or there's some broadforks that are made completely out of steel, and they have they have tines that are they're more like triangle shaped, and those are designed for more hard pack, hard pan dirt, and they can really penetrate the ground really hard, and you can pull on them as hard as you want, and it's never going to break. So for the really, really hard pan stuff, either a pitchfork or the all steel broadforks. Last thing, if you don't know what I'm talking about, what is minimal disturbance, minimal till, no till, what do these words mean? So on a normal farm, how it's traditionally done with machines or back in the day horses, what they would do is plow the ground or till the ground. Tilling is when you're turning the ground completely over. So when I rototilled all this earth, it spun it like this, it flips the soil underneath comes to the top. And that's something we want to avoid as no-till organic farmers and gardeners, because this is detrimental to the soil life in the ground. When you turn that soil over, you're exposing all the soil organisms are now being exposed to light and air, and they're underground the ground for a reason. They can't survive above the ground. So when you expose them, they die. When these soil organisms die, unfortunately, this is when we lose topsoil. So these organisms are responsible for they're kind of the glue in a lot of ways to holding the soil together, because of the different things they excrete and the processes that they're doing under the ground. So when you lose those soil organisms, you lose the fungus. The fungus helps communicate with the roots into the soil to find the nutrients that the plant needs to get. You lose that. The actual humus itself becomes dry and blows away. By minimally tilling, what I'm doing, I'm not exposing the soil. I'm simply lifting it. And by lifting it, air and oxygen is able to penetrate down in there, which the ground does need oxygen. You want oxygen in the soil. So that allows for that. It loosens the soil, making it easier to plant your transplants, easier for root development. And over time, if you do this for a few years, and you're pulling out your rocks, you're rotating your crops, you're adding organic matter, eventually, in about 3 years or so, it just depends on what you're doing and how fast you're doing it and how much organic matter you're adding, this soil will become incredibly soft, like potting soil, and I could just stick my finger in there. Right now it's pretty clayey, but it's not super balanced, so it's not at that point yet. So the goal is to get it super humusy where I'll just be using my broad fork. I'll punch it in, pull it back, punch it in, pull it back, and it'll be no work at all. Your goal is to try to get the best, most alive soil possible. And using no-till techniques like that is the best way to do it. Okay, so I'm gonna rake out my rocks, broad fork. I'm gonna be adding these little stakes that I made. And this is something I want to try out because I saw this at a very successful farm called Never Sink Farm. There's been a bunch of videos about them recently just because how efficient their farming operation is. And one of the things that they do is they stake out all of their 30-inch beds. So I'm gonna remeasure out these beds and line it up with my water and my pathways here. And these are just 10-inch stakes I cut to make a point so that I can pound these into the ground. And then I'll mark out where all my beds are. So the reason that Never Sink does this is if you've ever had in-ground beds before, you've probably dealt with over time as you're working the beds, the ground kind of spreads out and some of the dirt goes into the pathways, the beds start falling apart, and you have to remake your bed. And without a visual way to do it, a lot of times when you remake the bed, you make them a little uneven or it gets screwed up. So this is a super easy way to keep your beds locked into the position that you want. So 30-inch beds, 10-inch paths, and then when it comes time to remake the bed, all you need to do is I'll just tie a string around this and tie it to the other end on both sides, and then I have a perfect measurement of my 30-inch bed so that when I'm reworking this and remaking it, it's very simple to know where the beds are and just redo it. So yeah, I just want to try that out and see how I like it. Lots of what I'm doing out here is lots of experimenting and seeing what works the best for me and my applications in the context of the way I'm farming. So here's my technique I'm using to get the rocks out. So I'm just doing about a 6-foot length and I'm just chopping the dirt. Alright, that's just to loosen up the dirt and break up some of the dirt clods. And then I'm just going to run my rake back and forth and kind of push down a little bit, and I'm trying to break the dirt clods up and expose the rock. And you want to do this in sections, otherwise there'll be too much dirt and too much rock in it. It's hard to separate the dirt from the rock. And then I just lightly rake. I'm not allowing the rake's weight to really dig into the soil at all. I'm holding it up and just really delicately running it through the soil. And that'll help get some of the dirt out. Sometimes there's too many rocks, so you just want to make 2 piles. So that's what I'm going to do here, so I can limit the amount of dirt that I'll pull out of here. There we go, and I'm going to keep moving down the line. Back out here prepping the beds again, and I decided to change my mind. So you saw me prepping these beds, and as I was going through them, they're just incredibly hard, incredibly rocky. And my initial plan was to put root crops here, but after digging the soil and seeing what it's like, I don't think that it's going to be a good idea. I think they'll get bad germination rates for a couple reasons. Because when I take my seeder and I run it across the beds, because the dirt isn't loose enough, it'll get stuck on certain things. It'll get stuck on like dirt clods, or if I didn't penetrate the ground deep enough with the pitchfork, then there's going to be areas that'll be difficult to push it through. It causes the seeds to bounce and toss them everywhere, and it doesn't work very well. So what I've done instead, I thought about it a little more. And so what's going to go here is actually going to be some bi-rotational beds. So beds that I won't turn over quickly. So what I'll be planting there is some kale, chard, collard greens, tatsoi, mustard greens. Here's some of those sprouts. So I've got some red Russian kale, Vates kale, collard greens, mustards, tatsoi, chard of course. And then over here I've got more of the same. So I'm gonna put all those guys in those beds so that I can harvest them over a long period of time throughout the winter. Those plants have more crazy root structures that will be able to penetrate down into this ground, and it's gonna help break it up for me and do a little bit of the work for me. You know, the earthworms and the other life in the soil is also gonna help break it up as it sits there for a long period of time. It'll help turn the clay into more loam and organic material. So that's what's going here, long-term crops. Now I'm gonna be putting my root crops here instead. This bed here, I was actually able to use my Broadfork. It worked very nice. You can see it's super fluffy. On this one, it was hard packed on this left side near my walkway because I must have been walking slightly on the bed. So I'll have to either not walk along this walkway or just be really careful. So this one's pretty soft too, but you can see the difference. So this one was pitchforked and this one was broadforked. And the broadfork absolutely does a better job of aerating. Okay, so my next step here, I'm just gonna go through with the rake like I showed you yesterday, get the rocks out, get it smooth. I'll come back with my finishing rake and then even this out. I'll flatten it. And then of course I'm gonna bring my seeder out, seed it. I'm gonna hand water it. Because carrots especially are hard to germinate, and I want to get the ground really evenly wet. And then I'll put my drip tape out, let that run again, and then I should be good to go tomorrow. I am going to put out some burlap over this carrot bed. Carrot bed's going to be here because carrots need to penetrate a lot deeper in the soil than beets do. And it's not like a daikon radish where it's just such a massive thing. It'll just push everything out of the way and just keep driving down in the ground. Carrots, if it's hitting a rock or a hard pan area, it's going to turn out ugly and not very nice. You know, and people want to buy a really well-developed long carrot. So because of that, I've chosen this bed, which has a lot more fluffy, soft soil. It's got at least 6 inches soft soil, which is perfect for my Danver carrots, which grow to about 6 inches. So the carrots will push some stuff out of the way, but you know, it's too rocky. They're gonna just come out all mutilated. What I'd like to do is all my direct seeded crops, I would like to use overhead water to water them. So using a sprinkler. And the reason for doing that is you get better germination rates. Drip tape does not work the best for direct seeded beds like this, because if you've ever seen drip tape, it puts out a long line of moisture. It comes, you know, it kind of bubbles, a little 6-inch diameter. And then when you have things like that are really delicate, like carrots, when they start poking up through, the drip tape can get in the way. And in here you can kind of see, you know, on a smaller one, so when they come up, it's just 2 little true leaves. And if this drip tape's on top of it, they have a real problem kind of sneaking around and coming up. Whereas beets, on the other hand, because it's a bigger seed and bigger beginning sprout, I've noticed it is kind of able to push the drip tape out of the way a little bit better, but it's definitely not ideal. Overhead water is it's superior as far as germination and all that. Yeah, it's a little bit less efficient, but the initial sprouting and watering it just works better with overhead. So that's what I'm going to switch to eventually. You can buy little tripod setups with sprinklers, or you can just custom build them too with some PVC, and you can buy the little sprinkler heads, and you can build cheap versions of a tripod sprinkler. I may build one of those in the future, and then I'll show how to do it. So all right, I'm going to keep going on my prepping here. I'm going to rake this up, and that's it. And then this weekend my sprouts will be big enough and I'll plant this all out. And yeah, unfortunately it's going to get kind of hot this week. This weekend it'll get up to 90, and that's, you know, it's good for my seed sprouting and stuff like that because of faster germination, but I'm a little worried about my carrots because those are just so fickle, and if it gets too hot and they dry out and you're done. So this is what everything's looking like right now. A little behind on my fall planting. Still working 4 days a week at my other job, and I'm about to cut back. This week probably I'm going to write my letter to my bosses and cut back my hours quite a bit and start doing this more full time. Tiny bit scared, really excited, just ready to go hard on the farming thing and my website and my YouTube channel, and trying to help people become better growers or to start growing. So really excited, guys, and hopefully I'll be able to produce a lot more content for everybody and we can keep learning together.